All right, so it's good to see all of you. And um, this week is a very, very obviously important week to be studying in the Jewish world because, as we know, our brothers and sisters in Israel are in a battle, a fight, and they need all of our Torah and our mitzvos. So it's very good to come together today to study. And may today's study be in their merit and grant them the spiritual and godly protection that is the ultimate protection that works. With that, we are ready to start a new chapter, and not only a new chapter because it's a new chapter, which there are many of chapters in the Tanya, 53, but it's really totally new section of Tanya and really a new, I don't want to say new line of thinking because we've already had many lines of thinking, but I would almost put it as if until now in Tanya, we've been discussing the what. Now we're going to discuss the why. I'll say that again. Till now in Tanya, we've been discussing the what. Now we're going to get to why. Now, many of you have asked the why questions over and over. But till now, we've been discussing a lot of the what. And the what, let me just tell this person. A lot of the what has been what is. In other words, we have a godly soul, we have an animal soul. When you do a mitzvah, you do this. When you do a sin, you do this. When you study Torah, it accomplishes this. When you do a mitzvah, it accomplishes this. Joy is the greatest way to be able to accomplish our mission. Meditation is the greatest way to accomplish our mission. There are different types of meditation that can enable us to accomplish our mission, to study more Torah and do more mitzvos. Depression prevents us from studying Torah and doing more mitzvos, but we did not address the why, the big why. In other words, why are we doing all of this? We've been discussing the what. What does it accomplish? How we can do it. So we've discussed what, how, right? It's the old saying, right? What, why, how, when, where, right? So we've discussed a lot of what. We've discussed a lot of how. Now we're going to get into more of the why. Now, again, I said many of you have asked the why questions earlier, but that is going to be today's discussion and beginning of chapter 35. And we're going to flip a lot of what we've thought on its head because we're moving to the why question. So they tell the story of these government workers. They're on the side of 19, and one is digging a hole, and the other is one is digging a hole, and the other is filling the hole. One is digging the hole, one is filling the hole, and it keeps going. They keep going and going until someone comes over to them and says, "I don't understand. What are you guys doing? I mean, you're not accomplishing anything. You know, you're digging the hole. He's covering the hole. What's the point in all of what you're doing?" He says, "Listen, really, we're a team of three guys. We're government workers. I dig the hole. A second guy puts in a pipe. The third guy covers the hole. Unfortunately, the guy that puts in the pipe called out sick today. So what? We shouldn't do our work because he didn't show up. So we're still digging our holes and covering our holes. So there's no pipe going in." Obviously, it's a joke about the efficacy and efficiency of government workers, but this is a question a lot of us seem to ask ourselves in our life. We are born and we die. You know, you read King Solomon. We're happy and we're sad. You know, a time for this and a time for that. There's a time to win, a time to lose, a time to go in, a time to go out, a time to make business, a time to end business. You know, it almost seems like life can be a set of digging and filling, digging and filling. And the question we ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of it all? What is the purpose of everything that we're doing? And I think it's a question many human beings ask themselves at some point, which is, what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of life? What are we living for? Why are you getting up in the morning? That's a question that many of us ask ourselves. And everybody has a different answer they give themselves. I'll just present it to you in another interesting way, this question. There's there's some people who do these stunts online to get a lot of videos. And one of these guys, his one of his shticks, his videos, is all about basically paying people to do nothing and seeing how long they can last. And it's fascinating to see, like, you just lock a person in a room and see how long he would live in a room by himself, making 10 grand a day. And ultimately, or all different variations of that. And ultimately, all these people eventually walk away from the money because though the money is good, what's the point in breathing and eating if you don't get to spend time with your family and your friends? Eventually it becomes meaningless and the money becomes meaningless. So a lot of people chase money uh, without realizing, possibly until they're locked into a room by themselves, that the money is only a means to an end. And at some point, there's no point in staying in the room. Okay, once you pay back your debts and you have enough, a little bit of a cushion, you're not going to stay in there forever to make money because the money really is not the meaning of life. The money is a tool within our lives. So the question is, what is um, what is what is it that we're living for? What is the purpose with which we're living for? And fascinating enough, in one of these videos, there was one guy that was dating for 6 years, and finally he decided, oh, maybe I should get engaged, which he did get engaged after being locked in this room. That just shows you that sometimes in the rush of life, we lose our priorities. And this guy totally lost the plot. Like, why was he living for 6 years with someone that he loves without getting engaged and getting married? If you really love the person, but obviously life was busy, and he didn't think about what's important in life. So that's the question that we ask ourselves: is what is the purpose of life? And the truth is that it's a twofold question. The question is both ourselves, what is the purpose of my life? And what is the purpose of creation at large? So again, it's a personal question and it's a world question. Okay? So in the next three chapters, we're going to deal with this. Chapter 35, which is what we're dealing with today, is going to deal with what is the purpose of my life. Chapter 36 is going to deal with what is the purpose of creation at large. What did God want out of it? And chapter 37 is what is the purpose of our deeds? How do our deeds bring about the goal of creation? Okay. But again, today we're going to deal with, and it's going to actually, chapter 35 is a long chapter, so don't think it's an easy question to ask. In fact, it's such a difficult question to ask that it's discussed throughout the Jewish philosophers and Jewish Kabbalists, and it's discussed over and over because it is a big question. Why are we here? Because we don't have to be here. Obviously, God created us for a reason. What is that reason? It's the question that bothers most people at some point in their lives, and they have to answer that question to themselves. So let me start with a verse that we started with in the beginning of the uh, in the beginning of in the beginning of the uh, Tanya classes. In the beginning of the Tanya classes, we had a verse. It says, it is within close reach to you to follow Torah in speech, feeling, and deed. That is the basic verse of the entire Tanya, okay? This is the verse with which we start the Tanya with. It is very close to you to follow the Torah in speech, feeling, and deed. So we have till now explained in the Tanya, what does it mean? It is very close. What does it mean? It's very close. And we explained easy. Through meditation, it becomes easy. But now we're going to get into what does it mean about the deed? And deed plays a large role in Judaism, which is very interesting because if we talk about moments of meaning, deed seems to be almost a secondary item. Um, what's more important is the feeling. That's what we would imagine. What really connects us with God or or any relationship, right? Let's think about this. Let's think about any relationship. Um, if you're in a relationship, what are the most important moments in those relationships where you feel close? So let's say, for example, I'm raising children, okay? The moments where I feel greatest when I'm reading the children a story, when I hold them close, when I, rub their back, put them to bed, when I study with them. Those are close feelings. When do I not feel so close? Is like maybe potty training, maybe making them go to the bath, maybe making them clean the dishes. Though those are all important parts of parenting, those don't have the deep feelings, right? So the quality time that we call it, quality time, is generally moments where we have deep feelings. And what's interesting is, as we're going to get into this, is when it comes to our connection with God, one would imagine that quality time with God is Torah study and prayer. However, we're going to find out that actually the highest quality time is mitzvos, is doing good deeds. And this is expressed in the sayings of our sages. Our sages say, Lo hamedrash ikar ela hamaisa, the study is not the main thing, rather the deed. And the same thing the Talmud says. The Talmud goes back and forth, which one is greater, deed or study, deed or study. And the Talmud says study is greater because it leads to deed, which means deed is the greatest thing. So in other words, though we've explained till now in the Tanya the great value of Torah study. The Torah study allows us to become one with God. That is in greatness. In other words, Torah study may be greater on the scale of a feeling of closeness to God. But what is the most important thing? Is the deed. Deed is the most important thing. The mitzvahs are the most important thing. And that is really the direction the rest of the time is going to take. And that's what I think I've mentioned a couple times earlier, is that the Tanya really, until chapter 35, always places Torah above mitzvos. And once we get to chapter 35, we're going to flip it, and we're going to put deed at the top of the food chain. And this is actually expressed in that verse that I showed you a moment ago, and is actually the beginning of chapter 35. In other words, we're going to get into deed. That is really going to be the next section of the Tanya. So remember that verse. Remember that verse? The verse said, it is within your reach to follow the Torah in speech, feeling, and deed. Well, let's read the verse that Tanya starts chapter 35 with, through page 387. Let us clarify the terms so that you can do it in the verse, which is deed. For this body of commandments which I am commanding you this day is not concealed from you, nor is it far away from you. Rather, this thing is very much within your reach, in your mouth, and your heart, so that you can do it. In chapter 17, we explain the verse, in your heart that you may do it, requires us to have a minimal level of love for God, sufficient only to bring about the practical observance of mitzvahs. The body of commandments are naturally in your heart, but only sufficiently that you can do it, no more than that. So we are left with the question, why did God give most of us just enough love to do the mitzvahs and not more? In other words, if the main thing was feeling, then God would allow us to have deep feelings. But as we've explained multiple times in the Tanya, most of us will not be able to reach the high levels of love and awe that a tzaddik feels. Most of us are going to be limited in our love and awe of God. And if that's the case, that means that the main purpose is the action. Yes, feeling is important. And as we mentioned earlier, feeling is important because it allows God to rest within us. It allows us to actually do the actions to connect with God. But if feeling was the most important part of the process, then God would allow us, all of us, to have the feelings of a tzaddik. Obviously, Obviously, feeling is not the most important thing. Otherwise, he would allow us to have the feelings of a tzaddik. Deed is the most important thing. Remember, we're talking about Bainanis. We're all Bainanis. What's the deal with a Bainani? A Bainani is someone who will never be able to get the full level of feeling, the full spectrum of feeling, but a Bainani can be someone who does all the actions correct. What does that tell us? That tells us that deed is the most important thing. And so it begs the question, is what is with this deed? Why is deed so important? And why is that the ultimate purpose for which I am created? And that is going to be, so I'm setting the stage for the next couple chapters. And really to the end of the Tanya, you're going to find out that deed is the most important thing. Then the Tanya is going to go back to, well, how much a role does feelings play into deed? But deed is the ultimate goal, just given by the fact that we are always limited in our feelings of God. Deed is the most important thing. Just to tell you one more story about how deed is the most important thing, just to bring this home, it tells a story of a follower of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, who once told his Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, I'm very wealthy and I give lots of charity to the poor, but I feel inside, I feel rotten. I feel like I'm doing this all for glory, all for honor, all for my ego. And the Alter Rebbe told him, I understand, it's true. But he said, though you are doing it for not good reasons, the poor person that accepts your charity needs that money for real. In other words, though your feelings are in the wrong place, the poor person really needs that money. So don't stop giving the charity because your feelings are in the wrong place. Yeah, you can work on yourself, and maybe you'll never get it perfect, but the action is perfect in a certain sense. And that's really the idea that we're going to get to some extent, is that our feelings will always be limited. We should work on our feelings to get it as much as possible, but know that our feelings will always be flawed, but the action can be correct. And that's really the whole story of the Beinoni. The Beinoni is the person who will always have the back and forth within his body of the godly soul and the animal soul, but he can always make sure, he or she can always make sure that they will do the right thing. And again, this is all really a preface to the chapter. So with this being said, is that we're going to enter the realm of action in the next chapters, because we haven't been there, okay, too much. Okay, we're going to enter the realm of action and mitzvos. Let me get back to the question of, why are we here? For what purpose are we here on this earth? And actually, the Alter Rebbe is going to break this question into 3 layers. There are 3 layers, 3 levels in which this question exists. The first question is the question that every being on this earth asks. Everybody asks on this earth, Jew or Gentile. Okay, anybody you could think, not animals necessarily, but Jew or Gentile alike will ask the question, why am I here? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of my creation? The truth is, it is a question about animals as well. Just animals don't ask the question. We ask the question, right? But we sometimes ask the question, why did God create this? Why is this here? Why is the ocean here? Why is this rock here? Right? There's a reason for everything. Okay? Everything in this world, we have this question, why is it here? And so we ask that question of ourselves, why am I here? But there's a deeper layer to that question when it comes to human beings, and especially Jews. We have a godly soul. We have a soul that was in heaven, that was basking in the divine light. We have our soul was a piece of God, is a piece of God. Our soul was happy in heaven. Why, we ask ourselves, not only why are we here, why is anything here? Why was our soul subjected to coming down to this earth, to being subjected to the frailties of the human body, to being subjected to the needs of the human body, the needs of eating and drinking and sleeping, which take up most of its day? For what reason was this godly soul brought down to this world? As we say every single morning, Elokai, my God, Neshama Shanatata, be the soul that you've placed within me. Tahora, he is pure. We have to ask the question, why was this pure soul, who had no dealings with the evil inclination, no dealings with the body, why was my soul placed down here on this earth? For what purpose did God force it down here to deal with the mundane? What gain is it? What gain is there for this soul? And therefore, any answer we have, why are we here, has to be more than just, well, there's a couple of good things I can do. It has to explain why a holy soul would want to come down to this earth. Okay? And then the final question is, even if you answer me why the godly soul comes down to this earth, it seems to be like it'll never win. In other words, as many people have asked earlier in the Tanya, we're a Bainani. We're never going to win this war. We seem to be fighting this war of attrition. We seem to be fighting this war where we'll never win. We're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to move ahead in life. We're always going to deal with our evil inclination. They tell the story of a king who found this farmer chopping the wheat on his field. And the farmer was chopping the wheat with a sickle, and the king loved the movement of the sickle. You know, it's kind of the way it swished in the air, and the sound of it, and just the beauty of the movement. And the king told the farmer, why don't you come to my palace? However much money you make here in the field, I'll pay you double, and I just want to see you do it in front of me. It's entertainment. So the farmer agreed. No more standing in the sun, just, moving the sickle, getting double the money. Sounds like a good deal. And he stood in front of the king a day, 2 days a week. After a week, he told the king, I quit. King says, why do you quit? It's cooler inside. You're not in the sun. You get paid double the money. Your hours even a little bit shorter. He says, listen, king, before when I was working in the field, I could see what I'm accomplishing. Now I'm doing nothing. I'm just moving a sickle in the air. I don't see I'm going anywhere. I don't see I'm accomplishing anything. We want to feel accomplished. And this is the deeper question for those of us who study the Tanya especially, is what's our accomplishment? Where are we getting to? Yeah, I study a few more hours than other people maybe, but I waste a lot of time, and my evil inclination is always coming up with new tricks, and it never lets go of me. In fact, they tell us another story. The story is of there was once an older chassid. His name was Rabbi Posner, and his friend came to visit him. And his friend came to visit him, and they were reminiscing. And so Reb Shalom Posner was telling his friend over a cup of coffee, he says, listen, he says, sometimes I'm not sure I'm alive. He says, the ears don't work, the eyes don't work, and I have to go to the doctor, and everything in my body doesn't work. He says, sometimes I wonder if I'm really alive. I'm getting up there, getting in years. But then he says, but I have a trick how I know I'm alive. Because one thing is still working. My Yetzer Hara, my evil inclination, is still working overtime. So I know I'm still alive. As long as he's still working, I'm still alive. So as long as he's alive, I'm alive. So so that's just a fascinating story, but it's a powerful story. Is our evil inclination never gives up. It's always working. It's working overtime, in fact. So that's the question we have to ask ourselves: is what is the purpose in all of this work? So let us now read these three questions as it is given in the Tanya. Let us read these three questions as the Tanya spells it out. So he says, before we answer the question of what does it mean to serve God with deed, he says, let's answer this question. And let us also try to get some minimal insight into the reason for which Beinanim were created. Okay, so he wants to know, number one, why are we created? Okay, that's the question we all have to ask ourselves. So like I said, every being has this question. Why am I created? For what purpose am I here on this earth? Okay, but let's continue. And we need some insight into why the divine souls of the Beinanim came down into this world to be enmeshed in an animal soul. God could have created us in a way that the divine soul and the animal soul each had independent access to the body. Okay, I'm not going to get into the way he's explaining the question. I'm explaining it more on a simple level. Why? Okay, so question number one is, why is anybody created? Especially when we consider, number two, that we have a godly soul. Why did our godly soul have to come down into a body to be subject to all the bodily issues? And to spend his day with the animal soul, with sleeping, with eating, with drinking. And then he's going to ask the third layer of the question. Beinanim seem doomed to an endless struggle, since they cannot send her, the animal soul, away all their days, and dislodge the animal soul from its place in the heart's left chamber, so that the animal soul shouldn't cause inappropriate thoughts to the brain. In other words, layer number three is, not only is our soul subject to the body, but it's subject to a war with the animal soul of which it will never win. As he explains what we said earlier from the case of the Beinanim, the deep core of the animal soul from the Klippa remains as strong and as powerful as when they were born, and it is only the animal's garments of thought, speech, and action are unable to influence the body due to the Beinani self-mastery as explained above. And others, as explained above, we have the ability to control our thought, speech, and action, right? But we have no ability to control our inner, deeper core. And when we say we control our thoughts, we only mean controlling our continuous thoughts. And since this is the case, we are left with a question: why do the souls of the Beinanim have to come down into a world for a war which can't be won? For a futile struggle, God forbid, to battle in vain with the impulse to evil all their days, unable to prevail over it. So someone can feel they're 70, they're 80. They'd be like, I'm still struggling with some of the things I've been struggling since I was 20, 30, 40. For what purpose am I here on this earth? Anybody has any questions or comments before I go to the answer? Any questions or comments? Because though you probably know some of the answer, the way that Tanya presents it is so beautiful that really I can't think of anything more beautiful. Like, this is to me one of the most beautiful pieces of the Tanya, the answer here. Though we have pieces of the answer as it's presented here is just so beautiful that it completely shifts our focus in life and the way we look at life, and can add so much joy and meaning and purpose to life, because life without meaning is very, very difficult to live with. And so to me, this chapter 35 is one of the most important chapters. Like I said, we had chapters that discussed us the how and the what. This chapter is the why. This chapter is the why. Though we've given parts of the explanation here is so beautiful. And what's so beautiful about it is, additionally, is that this question has been asked for thousands of years, even in Jewish philosophy, and the answers will always leave you wanting. And I'll get to the other answers more next week. I don't want to get into them this week. But the answer is so beautiful. It's not to die for, it's to live for, right? Any questions or comments before I get to the answer? Or any thoughts on purpose in life, or how any of this relates to you personally? Nobody wants to offer anything? Okay. If you don't want to offer, you don't have to. Okay. So let us get to the answer. The answer goes like this. It's based on a Zohar. It's based on a Zohar. The Zohar gives us the answer. And it says like this. Yes, Nina, you have a question. You want to go for it before I get to the answer?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So we touched upon it once before. Why do we need purpose?
Why do we need purpose?
Yeah.
Um, well, obviously there is a purpose because God created us. But like I presented earlier, I think it is the natural human state to seek purpose and meaning. Now, people seek different things, a lot of times realizing they're not the real thing. Everybody is seeking meaning and purpose. Sometimes we're not actively because we're covering it over. But at some point in their life, people will seek meaning and purpose.
What if it's something that we're taught, that we're conditioned, but that like moving away from purpose is more what is what's ideal?
That's why I say is that I brought that example earlier of these guys that are not Jewish at all, that are stuck in rooms by themselves, and they start to realize that there's more to life than existing. Okay, what am I living for? There's a reason there's a lot of people that commit suicide. If we move away from purpose and meaning, that's the unfortunate consequence. Some people can't find their meaning. Some people find
Yeah.
life too hard. Life is hard. That's really the question. Life is hard. What is the purpose of all of this?
So, Rabbi, I just want to just say, just to be very clear, my purpose is to serve God. That's my purpose. But that's feels enough to me. That feels enough.
Sure.
So, like,
We're developing that idea. Obviously, we're not going to say the purpose is not
okay,
to serve God,
okay,
but we're going to develop that idea
okay.
in a way that makes it much more meaningful. In other words, my purpose is to serve God. One of the questions that comes up a lot, which is what the Tanya here is presenting, is what if I'm not doing a great job? What if so my purpose is to serve God, but I I fail a lot, I fail a lot, and I'm always struggling. I don't seem to have gotten anywhere in life. God, this was a mistake. Got to send someone else next time. It's also a question of
Because
God.
I
Why?
just
Yeah.
I just want to ask you because so here's how I handled a question today working
Uh,
with someone. They said to me, I just don't understand. I feel so alone. I feel all these negative feelings. And I said this. I said, I always think about someone from my community in Brooklyn, well, close to my community, who lost 9 children in a fire. I always think about him as like we don't know why we are experiencing this suffering, but when we truly serve God, when we truly understand our oneness with God, honestly, sometimes a purpose is I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not going to hurt myself because the pain is so bad. It's just it's a purification sometimes is how I look at it. Like a purification of my soul, an edification of my soul, a paring down and I don't know why this pain is occurring, but all I can do is just
so,
move through
so
it.
right. So right. But what you're answering is someone who's experiencing pain, and so they're kind of explaining their pain. This is some type of cleansing process. I'm asking a little further than that. What I'm asking is like this is, and I appreciate the question because it brings out the question even better. Um, so all right, so I'm here throughout this rough life to serve God. Okay, at the end of the day, that could be a good answer. But then the next question becomes, all right, well, if I'm here to serve God, why is God setting me up for such failure in serving Him? Why is He setting me up for such a bad service of Him? Okay. Why is it that I'm created in a way that I can never truly get ahead, that I'm always stuck with this evil inclination? And um, that's he's coming to answer that from the next layer of question. Okay, so you have the answer. Just he's taking you the next step.
Thank
Uh,
you.
additionally, with this piece of Zohar, you're welcome. This piece of Zohar is going to add one powerful idea that can change the perspective on my personal life. Why is me, little me, who is a nobody, so to speak, in the world of religious people in this world, why is little me so important, both in what I can do and for the world at large? And so that's why this next section is so important. And it goes like this. The example it gives is a candle. A candle is made up of three items. You have the fire. The fire needs fuel to burn, so you have wax or oil. And the fire and the oil cannot burn together, okay? You cannot light oil on fire, okay, unless you have a really high heat. Generally, you cannot light oil on fire. You need an intermediary. You need something in between that can bridge the mitzvah, sorry, that can bridge the oil to the fire, okay? So without the wick, the oil and the fire, which are the most important things, can do nothing. So though the wick is the smallest item here, and it seems quote unquote the most insignificant, it actually is the item that bridges the gap that allows the magic to happen. Without that wick, the magic of the oil and the magic of the fire cannot happen. And the same thing it says is about us and God, the human being. Is the fire is God, God's divine light. God wants his divine light to shine here in this earth, which we're going to explain more in chapter 36. How does God's light shine on this earth? With a mitzvah. A mitzvah makes God's light shine here on this earth. That's the oil. The oil is the fuel with which the fire of God can shine. But the problem is there needs to be something that bridges the mitzvah to the divine light. That is the human being. That is the divine soul. That is us. As I always say, God doesn't just need mitzvos to be done. He needs us to do the mitzvos. I'll say that again. God doesn't just need mitzvos to be done. He needs us to do the mitzvos. This explains why. If a Gentile puts on tefillin, it does nothing. It accomplishes nothing. Because their wick, their soul, is built for the 7 Noahide laws. They bring godliness into this earth. Their wick can only burn certain types of oil. Our wick can burn other types of oil. Our wick can connect certain types of oil to God. The mitzvahs that, right? So matzah on this earth, matzah can only accomplish something on the night of Passover when there's the mitzvah, the matzah, there's the wick, the Jew, and then there's God on that night of Passover. So, in other words, as insignificant as anybody may think I am, there is something that right now only I can do. When I do a mitzvah, nobody else can do that mitzvah, okay? You can also do a mitzvah, but the divine light that I bring is something unique that only I can bring. The mitzvah, the divine light that's going to shine on me when I do that mitzvah is something that only I can do. Nobody else can do it, and it requires a godly soul, a Jewish soul. And it requires me to do it at the proper time, in the proper place, and then I can connect that oil, that mitzvah, to the divine light, to the Shekhinah. This is, by the way, one of the reasons that men wear a kippah, because we have to be aware of the divine light that shines on our head. In other words, it's not that wearing a kippah brings the divine light on our head. It's for us to be aware that we have the ability to have the Shekhinah, the divine light that shines on our head when we do a mitzvah. Women, as we say, don't need to wear the kippah because they have the spiritual awareness without the kippah. Men need more reminders. That's why we wear the tzitzis. That's why we wear the kippah, and so on and so forth. We need more reminders. But again, why on top of the head? Why not a covering elsewhere? The reason it's on top of the head is because it's based on the Zohar, is the idea that when we do a mitzvah, the divine light shines on top of our head. So let us now read inside over here. All right. Let this be their consolation, to offer them comfort with a double measure of wisdom, and let their hearts rejoice with God, who is present with them in their Torah and worship. She's saying, why should you be happy? Because God is present with you in your Torah and your worship of God. We need to first examine a teaching of the inspired child in the Zohar, Parshas Balak, on the verse, a wise man has eyes in his head. The Zohar asks, is any other place where a man's eyes would be? In other words, what is Solomon, the wisest of all men? What does he mean a wise man has eyes in his head? Everybody has eyes in their head. Rather, the Zohar answers, the verse definitely has the following implication. Let's continue. We have learned that a person should not walk 4 cubits without the head uncovered. What's the reason? Because the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on his head, and the eyes and words of every wise man are on his head. Meaning to say, on that which rests and remains on his head. So when King Solomon says, a wise man, their eyes are in their head, he doesn't mean in their head, he means on their head. Meaning, if we are wise, we will focus on the divine presence that can rest on our head. And when the eyes are there, meaning you're conscious of the Shekhinah, the divine's presence, he will be aware that the flame lit above his head is in need of oil. In other words, that divine light above your head cannot burn if you don't have oil. If you're running out of oil, it's going to go out. Since a person's body is a wick and a flame above it, with a flame lit above it. And King Solomon shouts out to us, do not allow oil to be lacking from your head, Ecclesiastes 9:8, because the flame on his head needs oil. And oil refers to good deeds done by the person. And it was concerning this that he says, a wise man has eyes on his head, end of citation from the Zohar. So in other words, you need to make sure that the divine light that God places above your head always has the oil to allow it to burn. And if you do not give yourself that oil, that divine light will burn out. This is the beauty of us here on this earth, is that we are that wick. God gave us this amazing opportunity in this earth, gives the divine soul the amazing opportunity in this earth that we can be a wick that helps burn the divine light in this earth. The only thing we need is to have oil. The only thing we need is to have oil. Let us read, as the Tanya explains, the uh, um, as he explains this a little bit further. Let's clarify this analogy, where the light of the Shekhinah is compared to the light of the candle, which won't shine and grasp its wick without oil. In the same way, the Zohar explains, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, won't rest on a person's body, which is compared to a wick, except through good deeds exclusively. The implication here is that the soul alone, despite the fact that it is a piece of God above, does not suffice to provide oil for the wick, i.e. cause the Shekhinah to rest in the body. But if the soul is actually a piece of God, shouldn't that be enough to cause the Shekhinah to rest in the body? We'll answer that question next week. But the point is that we should not suffice in our lives with saying, well, I'm a piece of God alone. I am worthy alone just because of that. No, you should realize that because of your soul, that gives you the opportunity to bring the divine light upon your soul. In other words, we are born with something special, but we can't just leave it at that. In other words, we are born with the ability to be a wick for the divine presence. That is a special blessing. Other people on this earth, if you give matzah to your dog on Passover, it's not accomplishing any spiritual benefit. There's no divine light shining upon it. Maybe there's divine light shining upon you for feeding your dog, which is a mitzvah, right? But there's no divine light. Or even if there is a divine light, the divine light has to come through you. Okay? If the dog becomes a part of God's master plan, that has to be done through you because you are the wick that draws divine light into this earth. That is the benefit of a godly soul. That is the beauty of us being a godly soul. And to me, this gives so much meaning and purpose to mitzvahs, is to realize, as I always say, it's not about that mitzvahs should be done. It's about us being the ability to bring the divine light here on this earth through mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are just the oil. I am that wick. And so but the Tanya is going to develop this very deeply, okay? And it's going to explain a lot of questions. And I only got into it a little bit today so far. But the first thing that we can grab onto is that no matter who we are, we have that ability to be that divine wick. And so this explains, by the way, the Chabad motto of getting anybody to do a mitzvah. Well, why do we go out to the streets? Get a person who's doing mitzvah once. Well, why does that matter? What's the point? What's the purpose? What is that going to accomplish? The answer is, what do you mean? This person is a divine wick. No matter how he's lived his life, no matter how religious or irreligious this person is. And if this person will do a mitzvah right now, the divine light will be shining on their soul. Even if they never do another mitzvah ever again, it doesn't matter. Right now, they were able to bring a divine light into this earth. Something that only they could accomplish. I could do it, but that's only one light. If they do it, that's two lights. If you do it, that's three lights. There's every person has their unique opportunity and ability to bring the divine light here in this earth. And again, to me, this is not only a beautiful idea of why we each need to do a mitzvah, but it's also a beautiful explanation of something that bothers many people, which is which bothers many people, which is just one second, which bothers many people. That is, what does a mitzvah really accomplish, and why is it so important to do it correctly? And this really explains to you that there's really three elements to a mitzvah. There's obviously God's divine light, there's the oil, and there's the wick. All of those have to be in place in order for this candle to be lit. So, for example, if you have oil, you have a wick, you have a fire, but the oil is not in the right place. It's not in the wick. When you light the wick, it's not going to work. So if you're going to eat matzah at the wrong time, the oil is in the wrong place. It's not going to work, right? So let's give an example. The Passover is very late. A lot of people don't want to be up so late, so they make a Seder early. Unfortunately, doing the Seder earlier does not bring any divine light into your life. It may be studying because you're reading the Haggadah, maybe studying, so it's better than nothing. It may be nostalgic. Again, I'm not going to deny that any of those things are not good. They are good. But as far as accomplishing and bringing down the divine light of the mitzvah of matzah, it accomplishes nothing. It doesn't accomplish that. And so it's important. People always ask about the details of mitzvahs. Why is it so important to have the details of the mitzvahs? Well, you got to have the details correct in order for that oil to be connected to that wick, to be connected to that flame. Number two is the importance of the person in the mitzvah. Okay. So um, that is why I want to be involved in a mitzvah. Though I can pass on the mitzvah to be done by someone else, if I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, I should run to do it. I should run to go do that mitzvah because that mitzvah is an opportunity to allow God's divine light to shine on me. So if I'm busy with Torah study, okay, then maybe I should let someone else do it. But if I'm just busy doing nothing, if I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, I should run and go ahead and do it because that will bring oil for the divine light to shine in my soul. And number three, of course, is what does any mitzvah accomplish? When we do a mitzvah correctly, then the divine light shines in our head. This also gave a lot of meaning to the kippah, the idea of the kippah, to remind us of the Shekhinah that's above our head, and always to try and make sure we don't miss any oil. Always look for opportunities. I want to tell a story. The story goes like this. The story goes. Actually, no, I'll skip that. Okay, the story goes: the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, was in prison by the Russians. When he was put in prison, one of the ministers came to visit him, and he said, "I want to know what does it mean in the Torah when God asks Adam and Eve when they were hiding, Ayeka, where are you?" And the Alter Rebbe explained homiletically, because the guy didn't want Rashi's explanation. He said that this is the question that God asks each and every single one of us: is that where are we in life? We've lived so many years, and where are we? In other words, are we fulfilling our mission? We each have a mission. We do have a mission. Our mission is to give oil to that divine light that's on top of our head. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, Ayeka, where are we in regards to our life's mission? But I want to say that this question of why did the soul go into the body is a question the Alter Rebbe asks multiple places in his teachings. And each time he gives an answer, but he keeps asking the question. And that is because it's a question that we need to ask ourselves every single day. In other words, though we have a good answer why our soul came down to this body, we have to remember that question deep in our mind, because the truth is we have to remember that it is painful for our soul to be here. As much as many of us like to enjoy life, remember the pain of your soul. Your soul, when we're stuck enjoying ourselves, the soul is languishing because the soul is like, why did I come here for this? Like, I came here like just for that divine light. And when I'm stuck doing ego-filling activities, it's a pain for the soul. And so we need to constantly ask ourselves is, why did my soul come down here to this earth? And the answer to that question will hopefully be doing another mitzvah, doing another Torah or whatever else it is. I want to show a
Can I
video.
ask
Huh?
can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
The
setting up this video,
soul,
but you can ask a question. Yeah.
yeah, the soul is languishing, the soul is suffering, the soul is lamenting.
Yes.
Why does each person experience the same level of pain?
Well, listen, you may not feel your soul's pain. We have to try and tap into that pain. What we're telling you, if you become aware of it, that will be the greatest. If you
To
can
become
become
aware.
aware of it, then it can inspire you to um, to action. It's like people who are aware of children suffering in the world are pushed to action, right? So if we become aware of our soul's pain, that will hopefully push us to action. Does that make sense?
Because the world, yes, because most of the world is in pleasure seeking.
Yes, most of the world is in pleasure seeking.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I want to show this video because it is exactly on the topic we spoke about, where Yehuda Avner, you'll hear about him in a moment. He wrote a big book, actually. You should buy the book. I'll find the book as I show you the video. It's a great book if you want to know all about Israel. But he met the Rebbe many times, and this story exactly dovetails into what we're talking about. And one, it's also good because we are today discussing, obviously Israel's a big deal today. It looks like the screen is blank for you. You see, share screen 2. See if I can show this. See if it's going to work. See if I press play.
Avner served on the personal staff of
That doesn't work, right? Let's try this one. Can you see it now?
with President Carter. Menachem Begin sent him to report to the Rebbe.
There's still segments of that meeting that are classified. I must have spoken for half an hour. I had notes, non-stop. And then the Rebbe began to comment. We were now close to midnight. And I was very tired. But the Rebbe was as sprightly and as fresh as ever. He saw I was tired. He leaned over, put his hand on mine. I wasn't sitting right in front of him. I was sitting at the side of his desk. He put his hand on mine, and he says, Rabbi Yehuda. I always remember these words. Ato makir osonu kol kach. Lama ata lo mishtoyech elenu. You know us so well, why don't you belong to us? Now I shall never know whether it was only because I was tired that I had the temerity to say what I really felt, or whether I would have said it had I not been tired. But I heard myself saying to the Rebbe, Ki yesh li b'mishpachti Eile asher ro'im berebe kochot shehu eino ro'eh ba'atzmo. That I have within my own family those who see in the Rebbe powers which the Rebbe does not recognize in himself. And he got a very serious look in his eye. And he said to me these words. He said, Yesh kinire anoshim hazakukim lekobayim. There are evidently people who need crutches. And then he went on, Ani agid lecho, ma ani mishtodeh lasos. I will tell you what I try to do. I'll give straight away the English translation. He said, Rabbi Yehuda, imagine you're looking at a cupboard. And I tell you, open that cupboard. You open the cupboard. And you see inside a candle. But I tell you, that is not a candle. That is a lump of wax with a piece of string in between. Musai hashavo v'hachut nehofchim lener. When does the wax and the wick become a candle? Ka'asher ato mevi lehovo el hachut. When you bring a flame to the wick. Az hashava v'hachut nehofchim lener. Lemor, that is to say, they fulfill the purpose for which they were created. That is what I try to do. Shekol ish v'isha yekayim es hamatorah shelamana heim nivro. That every man and woman should fulfill the purpose for which they were created. When you bring the flame to the wick is inside, and that is the soul, then it brings to life the body, which is the wax, and the body and the soul fulfill the purpose for which they were created. And that is by the Esha Torah, the fire of Torah. And then, and this I can say, he began to talk to me about the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean. In detail. And about how it would be of strategic advantage to Israel if we could persuade Washington to establish a supply base for the Sixth Fleet in Haifa. It's 2:10 in the morning, I rise, he escorts me to his door, takes me by the hand, both hands, and I say to him, Ha'im ha'Rebbe hidlik et haner sheli? Has the Rebbe lit my candle? He said, Lo. Nosati lecha es ha'gafur. Rak ato yachol lahadlik es haner shelcha. I have given you the match. Only you can light your own candle.
Okay, so that is on the topic of what we spoke about. Light in the candle, just an interesting, slightly different way to look at the candle and the match. But what we can also get from this is the idea is that it's really up to us, is that we can help people and we can lead them to the right ideas, but it is ultimately, we can give people a match, but they got to light it themselves. All right, I want to end off here. It was also interesting you spoke about Haifa, because as you all know, Haifa has been attacked the last couple days. I wonder what would happen if America had something there. You know, how that would play with everything. That would be an interesting thing. Let me just share a screen over here. We want to say a psalm for Israel. Let's pull this over here 1 second. What am I sharing? No. Let's go back here. Sorry. More share. All right, share. This is Yehuda Avner's book. It's a worth a buy. It's a very, very long book. You'll get a great understanding of Israel, the prime ministers. But anyways, let's read the psalm. A song of ascents. I shall raise my eyes to the heaven. From where will my help come? My help is the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to falter. Your guardian will not slumber. Behold, the guardian of Israel will neither sleep nor slumber. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your shadow, is your right hand. By the day the sun will not smite you, nor will the moon at night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from now until eternity. Amen. May Hashem protect the people of Israel, bring them only peace. And as it says there, the guardian of Israel shall neither sleep nor slumber. Amen.
Amen.